Hey guys, welcome to Unit 7, and Unit 7 we're going to talk about the nervous system. So we're going to give just a brief overview of the nervous system in this unit. We're not going to go into too much detail in a lot of different things, but we're going to scratch the surface on a bunch of different things. So the main function of the nervous system, of course, is to coordinate coordinate everything within the body. We process all of the information that we see, smell, everything from our senses is processed in the brain, and that's how we form images, that's how we hear noises, that's how we taste, and so on and so forth. So the nervous system coordinates basically all of our bodily functions. Now we can break the nervous system down into different compartments, and that makes it a little bit easier for us to study. We can break it down structurally, and we can also break it down functionally. The first major division of the nervous system is a structural one, and that's where we separate the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, from the peripheral nervous system, which is everything outside of the brain and spinal cord. So this is a structural division, and the peripheral nervous system is going to be composed of all of the nerves that are outside the central nervous system, as well as the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. Now the cranial nerves are the nerves that come directly off the brain, and the spinal nerves are the nerves that come directly off the spinal cord. So if we have a look at this organizational chart here, the first division that we just talked about right there, that's going to be a structural one. My pen is not really working well today, as you can see. So we've separated out the brain and the spinal cord from the rest of the nervous system. So everything else that's not brain and spinal cord falls into the peripheral nervous system. Now the next two divisions that you can see here, this one here, and then this one down here, those are going to be divisions based on function, not based on structure. So the nerves and the cells and the tissue that are going to be forming these different parts of the nervous system are going to be the same, but they do different things. So these two are functional. The pen is really not working anymore. And the other one is structural. So we've got the somatic nervous system, which controls the skeletal muscles and a lot of things that we can control voluntarily. And we have the autonomic nervous system, and that controls all the things that we don't think about. Your breathing rate, your heart rate, it regulates glands, blood vessels, all the internal organs. All of those things are going to be controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Now, further to the autonomic nervous system, we break that down into the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is the one that's going to prepare your body for fight or flight. And we've talked about that in class already, and we've also talked about it in lab, so I think everyone's familiar with that. And then, of course, we have the parasympathetic nervous system, which does the opposite, okay? That prepares you to feed, breed, and relax. So those are the major divisions and organization of the nervous system. The next thing we'll look at is the neurons. Now the neuron, of course, is the basic unit of the nervous system. There's lots of different cells that make up the nervous system. For example, in this slide here, we can see a neuron, and we can also see those Schwann cells. So that's two different cells. But the neuron itself is the basic unit of a nervous system. And just like we discussed in previous classes and in the lab, you're going to have the cell body, this area here, and the cell body is going to have the regular organelles that we would normally see, the cytoplasm, the nucleus, but it's also going to have all of those dendrites, those projections that stick out. And those dendrites are responsible for collecting information and bringing information to the cell body, all right, to the nucleus. And then the neuron will assess what information is coming in based on what the dendrites collect. The dendrites can be connected to other axon or other neurons. They can also be connected to effectors, muscles and glands, but they gather information and bring it to the cell body. The axon is going to be the longest projection that comes off the cell body, and the axon's responsibility is to take impulses or information away from the cell body down to either an effector like the muscle we see there, or a gland, or it could even be another neuron. Wrapped around the axon is going to be the myelin sheath. And the myelin sheath is a coating of fat that's produced by those Schwann cells that wrap around the axon. And that helps insulate the axon, it helps make it more effective, more efficient, and it helps deliver messages faster when we have myelin on the axon. Now, we talked about the reason why we have those nodes, so the little gaps between the myelin sheath, and that's because that's where one Schwann cell meets, one Schwann cell ends and the other one begins. So that's a little tiny space in between the Schwann cells, and we call those the node of Ranvier. Now, neurons can also be broken down based on their function and their shape, their anatomy. What we're talking about here is a division based on the function. I can't rely on my pen anymore, sorry. So this is a functional breakdown of neurons. So we have three different categories here. We have sensory neurons, motor neurons, and interneurons. The sensory neurons are going to be the ones that collect information from different parts of the body. All of our senses, our skin, anything that would receive information from the environment is going to be controlled by these sensory neurons. And they're going to take information about the environment and they're going to conduct those impulses to the brain and the spinal cord. All right? The brain and the spinal cord is our central processing area, and they're going to make decisions and they're going to process that information bought by the sensory neurons. And they'll do that by using a bunch of these interneurons. So the interneurons are usually found in the central nervous system, and those neurons will move information around to different parts of the central nervous system, the spinal cord, or the brain, depending on where that type of information is processed. Once those impulses and information is processed, the brain will send out instructions, and that will go from the interneurons to the motor neurons. So these are the neurons that leave the central nervous system, and they will take the brain's processed decisions and information from the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord, to the effectors, which are usually muscles and glands. Now, we'll have a quick chat about the spinal cord before we move into the anatomy of the brain. So the spinal cord is the main link between the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. There's only a few nerves that connect directly to the cranium. Most of the nerves connect to the spinal cord. So information gathered from the sensory neurons are most of the time brought back to the spinal cord, where they're relayed to the brain. The spinal cord is contained and protected by the vertebrae of the skeleton. So all of the vertebrae that make up our spinal cord, our backbone, they're going to form a hollow tube in the center, and that's where our spinal cord is going to go. So it gives our spinal cord flexibility, but it also gives it a tremendous amount of protection. So it forms a continuous tube from the occipital bone, remember, which is the back of the skull, the bottom and the base of the skull, right down to the coccyx, which is the last vertebrae, right at the posterior part of the vertebral column. So the structure of the spinal cord, of course, is going to include gray matter and white matter. And when we talk about the gray matter, we're talking about unmyelinated tissue. So that's usually going to be those cell bodies like we discussed in lab. And we get that butterfly pattern of gray tissue that we find in the spinal cord. We get a dorsal and a ventral horn, and that's going to happen on both the left and right hand sides. We get the gray commissure that connects the left and right sides, and then we get the central canal where we have circulation of the cerebrospinal fluid. Now, the axons, which are going to be the fatty matter, which is going to make up the white matter, we're going to find those in the columns that surround the gray matter. So yesterday in lab we called them columns. In here though, probably you'll see tracks. But when we're talking about this, you guys think of this is the worst pen in the world. Think of those as columns. So we've got a posterior median sulcus. We said that was the posterior column. The anterior median fissure, which is surrounded by the anterior white matter column, and then we also have the lateral white matter. So just to review, have a quick look at this as a review from the lab. You see the butterfly pattern in the middle there. That's going to be our gray matter. You'll have a dorsal and an anterior horn, and then alongside of that you'll have the white matter, which is going to be arranged in columns. We've got a lateral, the posterior, and the anterior. So you guys should be able to remember that from the lab. Also, it's important to remember, you know, where the sensory neurons enter, usually from the back here, and then the information that's processed, and the motor neuron responses usually exits from the ventral horn. So here's a brief look at the spinal cord and the spinal nerves. Okay, so if you look down, and they've kind of removed the vertebra, so that you can see where the spinal cord passes. You can see it flows just like the spine, the natural curve in the spine. And you'll notice that from each one of those vertebra, so we talked about, you know, the cervical, the thoracic, the lumbar, and the coccygeal, or the sacral. They will have nerves exiting from each segment of the spinal cord, and those nerves will go and they will have a specific function and a specific location where they work. So for example, just a quick look, I don't expect you guys to remember all of this, but if we look real quickly in the area of between L1 and L4 down here, those make up the nerves that will innervate the leg, and the femoral nerve, which has a lot to do with the feelings that help us walk and understanding the feelings of our legs. You'll also see that big thick nerve down here called the sciatic nerve, and that's one that can play a role as you get older. Often you get conditions where this nerve becomes inflamed, and you get a condition called sciatica, which can be very, very painful. Okay, so that's it for the introduction to the nervous system and a little bit about the spinal cord. The next video, we're going to go and talk about the anatomy of the brain.